Gravel bikes are one of the fastest evolving cycling disciplines, and these days you can get a bike designed for everything from flat out single stage sprints to multi-day adventures to hucking it down snowy mountain bike trails. Sure, why not? And if that last category of rider sounds like you, then you are in the right place, because today we've got 5 of the most unhinged gravel bikes money can buy. When choosing the bikes on today's list, we looked for slack mountain bike inspired geometry, wide tire clearance, and burly components. But every bike still had to be spec'd with drop bars because, gravel. We also only chose bikes from mass market consumers. So while I'm sure you could find some guy to weld you up a 62-degree gravel bike, you won't be finding that on this list. One last thing to mention is that the bikes we'll be talking about in this video are the top tier flagship builds, but in most cases, there's a more affordable version of the same bike, and it still gets a lot of the same features that earned it a spot in this list anyway. And if you want to learn more about all of those bikes, there is a link down in the description to our website, 99spokes.com, where you can compare the geometry, specs, all that jazz. So without further ado, let's kick it off with bike number 5, the YT Szeptor. Now, for most folks, the 69.4 degree head tube angle, dropper seat post, and 40mm suspension fork would be overkill on a gravel bike. But believe it or not, this is actually the most restrained of the 5 bikes we're going to be talking about today. The Szeptor also has the shortest wheelbase and a tie for the shortest chainstays of all the bikes on today's list, which is going to help retain some of that quick, precise handling gravel bikes are known for, as well as make getting loose on dusty single track that much more exciting. For the number crunchers out there, a size large has a 407mm reach, 611mm stack height, 425mm chainstays, and a wheelbase of 1095mm. In addition to its fun, focused geometry, we also love the clean lines of the Szeptor, especially when you look at the back of the bike with that integrated rear fender. Tire clearance and mounting points are a bit on the sparse side here at 47mm, and you get 4 pairs of bolts inside the front triangle. That said, you do get tidy internal cable routing and, as you'd imagine for a gravity gravel bike like the Szeptor, dropper post compatibility. Speaking of dropper post, let's go ahead and talk about the part spec. And yes, the Szeptor does come spec'd with a dropper post. In fact, any model that you get in the Szeptor line is going to have one. The top tier Core 4 build gets a 50 or 75mm RockShox reverb axis post, and that is the shortest drop of any bike on the list. SRAM also takes care of the group set with the force axis, drivetrain, and brakes, and it's worth noting that this is the only bike on our list without a wide range mountain bike cassette, so you better be ready to work extra hard for the steep climbs. The cockpit also leans a bit more towards the conservative side of the spectrum with a 70mm stem and relatively narrow bars across all sizes. Lastly, the YT Szeptor Core 4 rolls on a pair of WTB Proterra Light wheels and 42C WTB Resolute tires. All in all, the YT Szeptor may be the most conservative of any bike we're talking about today, but that also makes it the most well-rounded, meaning it could be a great option for a lot of folks out there looking to have a gravel bike that can do a lot of different things. It's also an incredible value, and the base model carbon-framed Szeptor lists for less than $2,000. Moving on now to bike number 4, which is just slightly spicier than the YT, and that is the Kona Ouroboros. The Kona has a similar reach and marginally steeper head tube angle than the Szeptor, but has a pretty dang high stack across all sizes. This gives it the highest stack to reach ratio of any bike on our list, resulting in a more upright riding position. This short front end is paired with some long 445mm chainstays to keep things extra stable, even if your local gravel zone is Galbraith. The Ouroboros is no slouch when it comes to frame features either, with clearance for up to a 53mm or 29 by 2.1 inch tire and a splattering of mounting points throughout the frame. Unsurprisingly, the Ouroboros, and more specifically the Ouroboros Supreme, has a heavy-hitting set of components designed to blend the speed and efficiency of a gravel bike with the handling characteristics of a mountain bike. Up front is a 40mm RockShox Rudy Explorer Ultimate. SRAM also takes care of the group set with 4 shifters and cranks paired with a wide range EXO T-type cassette and derailleur, giving you all the gear range you need for steep single track climbs. You'll also get 125mm RockShox reverb access dropper post, and interestingly, the Ouroboros actually uses a 31.6 dropper post standard, which is what you find on a lot of mountain bikes, so if you wanted to go ahead and upgrade to a longer travel dropper, you could. Now, speaking of mountain bikes, this guy has actually got the widest bars of any on our list. The size large frame getting some whopping 500mm wide Ritchie Venture Max bars. Rounding out the part spec are some Zip 101 Explorer carbon wheels wrapped in 50mm Maxxis Ravager tires. We've made it to the third most unhinged bike on our list, the Marin Gestalt X. And this is where things really start to get a little out of control, especially when it comes to geometry. The Gestalt X gets a 67.5-degree head tube angle. That's as slack as many cross-country mountain bikes. This is offset by some short 425mm chainstays, helping keep the wheelbase in check. Lastly, the Gestalt X has a longer reach and lower stack than any other bike on our list, putting you in a pretty aggressive forward-leaning position, which should make those climbs just as fast as the descents. The Marin Gestalt X is actually the only aluminum frame that we're featuring in today's video. And so with that, you shouldn't be surprised that it's also the cheapest, the base model only costing $1,549. But don't worry, still has all the features you need for your rowdy gravel riding needs, including 50mm tire clearance, brazen internal cable routing, fender mounts, and a variety of gear and rack mounts on both the frame and fork. Next, let's talk components. And just as we've done in the past, we will focus on the top tier model, which in this case is the Gestalt XR. It's still quite a bit more affordable than anything else on today's list, so don't expect to see any electronic bits and pieces or even any suspension. Instead, you get a carbon fiber rigid fork and 12-speed SRAM Apex group set with a 10 to 52 tooth GX cassette. The bike also gets a Trans-X dropper post with either 70 or 110mm of drop, depending on the size. The rest of the components, including a 50mm mountain bike inspired stem and some 480mm wide bars, are in-house Marin components. Lastly, the bike rolls on a pair of 44C V Tire Co. Rocketman tires. To be honest, this is probably my favorite bike on today's list. It's simple and affordable, but still gets some rowdy mountain bike inspired geometry and tried and true part spec. So if you're looking for the cheapest way to get yourself a gravity gravel bike this summer, then the Marin Gestalt XR is absolutely the bike for you. Our runner-up for the most unhinged gravel bike is the Cotic Cascade, a 29-inch steel behemoth that is capable of running up to 100mm of travel in the front. Of all the bikes on today's list, I would say that this one blurs the line between mountain bike and gravel bike the most, but seeing as it does come spec with drop bars, we're counting it gravel, at least for today. Now, let's go ahead and start with the geometry, which, like all of today's bikes, is definitely focused on maintaining the most speed and composure on rough, rowdy terrain. It has a slack 69-degree head tube angle and 438mm chainstays, giving it the second longest wheelbase of any bike on our list. It also has a relatively long reach and high stack. The Reynolds 853 tubing should help dampen vibrations coming from the trail, as well as the massive 29 by 2.4-inch tires you can fit in the frame. Speaking of massive, the Cotic also has a huge number of mounting points sprinkled across the frame and fork. And Cotic actually makes their own custom frame bags designed specifically for the Cascade. Unlike other bikes on today's list, the Cascade opts for simple external cable routing with a port for the dropper post in the bottom of the seat tube. It's also worth noting that the frame's geometry is suspension corrected for a 100mm suspension fork, and it uses mountain bike boost spacing for both the front and rear axle. In terms of components, you have basically unlimited options when ordering a Cascade from Cotic, including speccing it with flat bars. But sticking with our rules, like I said a second ago, we are talking about the drop bar model, more specifically the Platinum tier, which, as name suggests, doesn't hold anything back. It features a mullet SRAM group set with 4 shifters and brakes, an X01 cassette and derailleur, and some super bougie Cane Creek E-wing cranks. You also get a 125mm bike yoke dropper post, carbon fiber Hunt XC wheels, and 29 by 2.1-inch WTB Nano tires. In terms of cockpit, you get a 60mm Cotic stem, as well as some 460mm wide Cotic bars. Lastly, you have your choice of 3 different forks. Up first is Cotic's steel alpaca fork, then there's Salsa's carbon fiber fire starter, and finally the RockShox Sid Ultimate with a 100mm air spring. Obviously, for this list, we'll opt for the latter. So the Cotic Cascade has 29-inch wheels, boost spacing hubs, and a mountain bike fork. So let us know in the comments whether you think this should count as a gravel bike or if we're tiptoeing too much into the mountain bike world. In the meantime though, we need to move on to our #1 most unruly gravel bike. And that, of course, has to be the evil chamois Hagar. The biggest talking point here is definitely the geometry, which is highlighted by a 66.7-degree head tube angle, which is slacker than a lot of cross-country bikes. On top of that, it also has the lowest bottom bracket and lowest standover height, which of course makes this thing exceptionally capable off-road. But don't let that make you think any less of this bike's ability to carry speed on less technical terrain, too. Much of that performance comes from the lightweight aero-inspired carbon fiber frame set, which, like many of the other bikes on today's list, is adventure-ready with several sets of mounting points on the frame and fork. It's also compatible with front and rear fenders, a rear rack, and even a front derailleur, though I can't imagine there being much of a crossover between people wanting to get a 2x gravel bike and people interested in the Chamois Hagar. Another cool feature they borrowed from mountain bikes that you don't see too often in the gravel world is an integrated down tube and chainstay protector, once again hinting at the type of antics that Evil has designed the bike for. In contrast to its wild geometry, the part spec on the Chamois Hagar is actually relatively constrained. It's highlighted by a SRAM Rival Access group set paired with a GX derailleur and cassette and a forced carbon crankset. It's also spec'd with the longest travel dropper post of any on our list, with a SRAM Reverb Access ranging from 125 to a whopping 170 millimeters depending on the size. In terms of cockpit setup, you do get a short 50 millimeter stem, but the 460 millimeter wide bars might leave a bit to be desired for some folks interested in the bike. Lastly, in terms of wheels and tires, the Chamois Hagar rolls on a pair of WTB Pro Terra lights wrapped in 45C WTB Riddler tires. To be honest, I can't think of a better way to wrap up this bike segment than just by reading this quote off of Evil's website when talking about the Chamois Hagar. They say, "As shamefaced as we may be about now being in the gravel market, we're not even sure we're in it. Maybe we've invaded it, a hostile takeover. Alert the press, gravel's been hijacked, and the Chamois Hagar is here to party." So if you too have felt a bit shamefaced about your newfound love of drop bar bikes, then I can guarantee that nothing will wipe that guilt away faster than this bike. If you want to learn more about any of these 5 bikes that we've chosen as our most unhinged gravel bikes, then scroll down to the description. You can find a link to compare all of them side by side on our website, 99spokes.com. There we have a variety of tools that make choosing your next bike easier than ever. We'd also love to hear which bike is your favorite, as well as if we missed any potential gravity gravel rigs that we should have included. Of course, if you haven't done so already, please take a second to go ahead and like this video, subscribe to the 99 Spokes YouTube channel, and lastly, remember that bikes are for everyone. Have fun out there.